At Arlington National Cemetery, the morning air carried a weight that was almost physical, a mixture of silence, reverence, and the faint rustle of flags in the distance. Every step inside those gates usually echoed with respect for the fallen. Yet on that particular morning, at the entrance itself, that sacred silence was broken by sharp, impatient voices. Two young guards stood firm, blocking the path of an elderly man. He was 87 years old. His name was John Miller, and though his back was slightly bent with age, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that years could not erode. His suit was plain, almost modest, and his shoes bore the marks of long journeys. But the guards didn't see a veteran. They didn't see a man whose life was interwoven with sacrifice. They saw only a stranger who, to them, didn't belong. When they demanded identification, papers, or medals, their words carried a sting of dismissal. Insults slipped from their mouths, their tone dripping with condescension. Yet John did not answer in kind. He did not argue or raise his voice. He stood his ground in silence, the strength in his stillness louder than any protest. Finally, he spoke with a voice soft yet steady. "I'm here for the general. He would have wanted me here." The officers scoffed, exchanging glances, convinced this frail man was weaving lies. To them, the notion that such a simple figure could have a place of honor beside a fallen general was laughable. They prepared to force him away. But just as they moved, one guard noticed a small crooked pin on John's jacket. Tarnished and bent, it looked like nothing of value, more like trash than treasure. One lieutenant even flicked it with a mocking laugh, unaware that this tiny piece of metal held the weight of an entire lifetime. That pin was not decoration. It was a fragment of history, a jagged piece of shrapnel from a battlefield decades earlier. On a night long ago, John had pulled a young officer named Wallace from the jaws of death, carrying him through fire and chaos. That shrapnel, dug from Wallace's body and reshaped into a pin, was given privately, in gratitude. To Wallace, it was worth more than medals. To John, it was a reminder of the night courage and loyalty spoke louder than fear. Not everyone at the gate was blind to what was unfolding. Captain Hayes, who stood a short distance away, noticed John's calm, unshakable presence. Something about it felt out of place. Not weakness, but strength disguised as humility. Suspicion grew in his mind. Acting on instinct, Hayes made a discreet call to Colonel Markinson, a man who had worked closely with the late General Wallace. When Markinson heard the name John Miller, and the description of the crooked pin, his breath caught. His world seemed to stop. Wallace had left behind instructions for this exact moment. If John Miller ever appeared, no matter when, no matter how, he was to be honored without hesitation, without question. Minutes later, the atmosphere changed. A convoy of black vehicles arrived at speed, their engines breaking the tension in the air. From them stepped a towering figure, four-star General Michael Peters. The guards, suddenly pale, froze in place as realization set in that they had gravely misjudged the man before them. General Peters walked past the young officers without a word, his focus locked on John. In front of the old man, he stopped sharply, stood at full attention, and gave the crispest, deepest salute of his life. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, he addressed John with a single word, "Sir." Murmurs rippled through the small crowd that had gathered, confusion mixing with awe, and then Peters explained. John Miller was no ordinary man. He was known in whispers among veterans as the Shepherd, a soldier who went where no one else dared, who pulled comrades back from death when hope was gone. The pin on his chest was not worthless junk, but a sacred reminder of a life saved, a bond forged in war. That single act of heroism had inspired Wallace to create what became known as the Miller Protocol, a doctrine passed down through the military, teaching that true honor is not always worn on uniforms or displayed in medals. It is found in character, in actions made when no one is watching, in the unseen giants who walk quietly among us. From that day on, soldiers were taught to look beyond appearances, to recognize courage in its truest form. For John Miller, the glory was never in medals or recognition. It was in the lives he had carried through fire, the men who lived because he refused to leave them behind. The young guards had seen only an old man, frail and unremarkable. History, however, saw a hero, one whose courage shaped generations. In the end, John Miller's presence at Arlington became more than a visit. It became a lesson, a reminder that respect in its purest form is not about rank, age, or appearance. It is about the courage carried quietly, the sacrifices made without wit, the sacrifices made without witness, and the giants who live among us, men and women who may leave their medals in the dust but never set down their honor.